Hall. Thank you so much for joining me again.
So happy to be here. Happy to be back.
In our past conversations, you and I have talked about how successful ballot measures can really transform communities and transform lives, right? Especially in states where they have regressive reproductive policies like abortion bans, and generally in places where inequality is outpacing any efforts to help poor people, working class people in red states, right? I've been really impressed with how they've performed in red states. They've been used to increase minimum wage, to expand Medicaid access, and of course, reproductive care. And
Yes.
if you'll remember, one of my persistent concerns was that the success of these ballot measures would draw the attention of the wrong people. And I think we're seeing that now. The Fairness Project
Yeah,
just released a report showing that the ballot initiative process is being attacked in a number of states. And I was wondering if you could give me a picture of what's happening right now.
sure. And I think you've summed this up exactly correctly. So I'll describe what's happening and then we should turn back to why. But it really does feel like a backlash to the success and power that voters have exercised in passing the policies they want at the ballot box. But the report that we just released reveals that attacks on direct democracy, on ballot measure processes, have doubled in the last 2 years. So, across 15 different states, we saw nearly 150 bills introduced by red state lawmakers to make it harder for voters to put ballot measure questions in up for a vote and make it harder for them to pass once they get on the ballot. And all of these policies, though they vary in nature, they might look a little different from state to state, are designed to consolidate the power in the hands of elected officials and really take power away from voters using their rights to bring forward questions like the on the issues you mentioned: Medicaid expansion, reproductive rights, wages, paid leave. And so we've seen a lot of flavors of those attacks, but the first thing that we want to point out is that this is a deluge of new attacks from right wing lawmakers who don't like what their voters are doing at the ballot. And I'll throw one more stat at you. We saw a doubling from 2023 to 2025. We're at nearly 150 bills introduced just this year. But from 2000 to 2023, there was an average of 16 bills a year. So that increase is nearly tenfold from the average of the prior 23 years. This is not a thing that has been a high priority that conservative lawmakers have been worried about protecting their constitutions or undoing fraud or making sure that these processes work well. This hasn't been a topic that they've been particularly concerned about. And now that we see this real increase in the use of ballot measures, now all of a sudden they're coming after the process.
And if you'll remember from our past conversations, this is something that I always bring up, right? What if they counterattack? How are they going to attack ballot measures? And it's been kind of measured, but there. But you're right, that's a deluge of attacks. Is this driven by a single group? Do we know? Is it organized?
We don't know that there is a single group behind it. There is not a parallel to the Fairness Project on the right. The Fairness Project, the organization that I run, is an all ballot measures all the time organization. We not only work to pass proactive ballot measures that help working families, we also work to defend ballot measure processes. I wish it were as straightforward as there's a right wing unfairness project that is working to dismantle the process really publicly. But we do see a lot of common versions of legislation. We know lawmakers across states are talking to each other. We know that we see similar provisions of these bills pop up across state lines, but it is mostly coming from state lawmakers as best as we can tell.
I see. It's so funny that you called it that, the unfairness project, because if you're going to reduce minimum wage, that's the only thing that you can call it, right?
Exactly.
The
Exactly.
unfairness project.
Yeah.
These kinds of attacks on democracy, they often fly under the radar, in my opinion. It's not the cancellation of a late night TV show. It's not censoring some celebrity. That's bad, right? But I think that this is equally as damaging because you're silencing the citizens and their right to participate in little d democracy.
Yes.
What is at stake if we were to lose access to creating ballot measures?
So there's both the philosophical what's at stake and there's the really deeply practical and personal of what's at stake. And I think some of us who live and work in politics and got political science degrees, and I count myself among them, really focus sometimes too much on the philosophical impact that people have fewer opportunities for civic participation, fewer opportunities to be heard in the democratic process. It makes all of our institutions weaker when people feel like they can't get their voices and their issues heard in the public square. I believe all of that. I think it leads to polarization and I believe it leads to isolation. But the practical and the personal is that we will lose the opportunity to raise wages for working families in red states. We will lose the opportunity to overturn abortion bans. We will lose the opportunity to overturn biased redistricting maps and gerrymandered policies. So, ballot measures fundamentally give we, the people, the opportunity to check our politicians when they are not acting with our values and our interests at heart. That shouldn't happen that often in a well functioning representative democracy, but it is happening very frequently right now, where lawmakers are trying to consolidate power in their own hands, where they are dismissing the views of voters, where they are increasingly playing to the ideological fringes. And that makes ballot measures as a tool for the common sense policies really essential. The stuff that is not getting the time of day in the clickbait wars, in the who's the most extreme wars, in the who has the most followers wars, but are the kitchen table issues that are not sexy, but really important. And that's where we can make progress with ballot measures. And we will lose that opportunity. And there are millions of people with higher wages in this country right now, thanks to ballot measures. Millions of people with Medicaid coverage, thanks to ballot measures. People getting abortion care right now because of ballot measures. And all of that will be lost.
I mean, I know you're worried. I'm especially worried because one of the bright spots that I've held on to was the fact that I think in our last conversation, we talked about the fact that if you divorce the legislation from the person, you can get really deep red states to support really progressive policies. And that's has really
Mm-hmm.
been a bright spot that I've held on to, right? You think of a really deep red state that's saying, like, yes, we want paid leave for everyone. That's a very progressive policy. And the idea of losing that is pretty scary. And what we've seen over the recent years is that you'll have some anti-democratic movement, small d democratic movement, and it starts off small, like with ballot measures. There's a few here, a half a dozen here, a half a dozen there, and then they're testing the waters, and then they all of a sudden they kind of snowball, like we're probably seeing right now. That's been kind of uncovered in your report. We've seen that with voting rights, we've seen that with reproductive rights. Is it hyperbolic to think that in a few years this process and this freedom could be gone?
I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that is the intention of people who are attacking the ballot measure process. If we don't resist, if we don't fight back, if we don't shine a bright light on this problem and really take action to prevent these rights from being stripped from us, then it's absolutely true that we will not have functioning ballot measure processes nearly anywhere. And so that is it is not hyperbole. The thing that I am placing hope in is that these battles are not yet lost. And so, though there is something very insidious and strategic about their tactic to change the venue and the topic of the conversation from minimum wage, from reproductive rights, from popular policies they know will win, into the esoteric weeds of how many signatures do you need from which counties and should they be notarized and how many days or weeks do you have to get them. No one is thinking about that at their kitchen table. Nobody is thinking about that as their high political priority. You are right that it does not get a lot of attention, and that is on purpose. They are dragging all of us who care about this into the weeds and trying to win the battle there because they know they can't win the battle on the merits of the issues that people really care about. But if we can shine a bright enough light into those weeds, if we can say, look, this matters, we have opportunities to defeat what they are doing. And it is not a foregone conclusion that direct democracy will die. It is not a foregone conclusion that these processes will become unusable. And so we need to both be fighting back against these attacks, and we can talk about how that's happening in a bunch of these states. We also need to keep using direct democracy because it is hard to keep people invested in preserving a process that they can't see the utility of. So while we are fighting back against changes to ballot measure processes, we've
Mhm.
also got to continue to bring forward ballot measures to restore reproductive rights, to raise the minimum wage, to expand universal school meals, to expand paid leave. We have to show the tool in action as one of our strategies for making sure that people are invested in preserving it.
Something you said was really important, and I just thought about it now, and I want to try to articulate it in a way that's clear to people. So I think that they often win when they focus on the weeds because no one is interested in the weeds. If you tell people in a deep red state, hey, do you want higher wages? Do you want paid family leave? They'll go, yes, like, this is great. Of course we do. It's obvious, right? But if you tell people, do we need a certain number of signatures to pass ballot measures? They're like, I don't
I
know,
don't
I
care.
don't care, right? I don't care, right? And in your report, you talk about these separate tactics that they're using. There are four, I think, that you highlight in the report that they're using to attack the process. And they are supermajority requirements,
Mm-hmm.
increased issue scrutiny, interference from elected officials, and onerous signature regulations. Can you talk us through those tactics?
Yes. So the ones, to the extent attacks on ballot measure processes are getting attention from the media or from any of us, usually they're getting attention when we come to realize that certain states either have or are proposing supermajority requirements, meaning you have to get 60% of the vote in order to win, right ahead of Ohio's successful reproductive rights ballot measure in 2023. Their legislature tried to change the rules of the game to require them to have a 60% supermajority. That vote happened in August, right ahead of the November election on abortion. So that was a high profile attack on the process. It's a pretty easy thing to explain why it's undermining direct democracy rights to increase the number of votes you need to win. We saw that really high profile policy, the effects of it in Florida this past fall, where 57% of Floridians voted to overturn the abortion ban there, and it wasn't enough because Florida already has a 60% supermajority requirement. It's the highest in the nation. So that tactic is simple, it's easy to understand, and we have been able to defeat it in a number of states, not just Ohio, also South Dakota, also Arkansas. And it requires lawmakers who want to make that change to go to the voters and say, we want to change the Constitution. We want to make this change of how many votes it takes to win, and we need your approval to change the Constitution. So we, as voters, have the opportunity to vote these proposals down. So it's both a simple to understand change, and it's also one that we have the opportunity to vote down. And voters in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Utah will for sure be voting on this very question in 2026. And Missouri voters will have their own version of this question of, do you want a supermajority requirement for future ballot measures? We may see more states pile on as legislatures convene this spring. But that one is straightforward, really problematic for the process, and we have to vote on it. So that's the first. Issue scrutiny is one that people often think is, it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. The proposal is, should we only have a single subject per ballot measure? We should make sure that there's only one thing that folks are voting on. And on its face, that can sound like a pretty good idea. People should know, like, if we're going to have a ballot measure on abortion, it should be separate from the ballot measure on minimum wage so that people can make up their own minds about two separate issues. But what this actually does is leave it to the courts in conservative states to determine what counts as two separate issues or not. So, is the right to miscarriage care a different issue than abortion care? And therefore, can they kick you off the ballot because it violates a single subject? If we say we want to raise taxes on corporations and spend that money on childcare subsidies, is it two subjects, the increased tax and the childcare subsidies? Though any normal person would see these as a single concept that is one thing that we can all understand in a single sentence, by creating this rule and adding more discretion for judges, we're seeing a lot of common sense issues get kicked off the ballot or end up in really long litigation over whether their very simple ballot constitutes a single subject. So that's now we're starting to really get in the weeds. Like, this is weedsy. The other huge death by a thousand cuts things that we see is the attack on the signature collection process. And that's how voters get their issues on the ballot. You know this, I know this, we're civics nerds, but for people who don't know, these are all the people with the petitions and clipboards out there. They have to collect a certain number of signatures and say, enough of us want to vote on this question, we're taking it forward. Now let's bury all of those well-meaning volunteers in red tape. Let's say you've got to get more signatures. You've got to get every page of signatures notarized. You've got to collect signatures from every county in the state. You've got to not just get people's names and addresses, but you've got to ask them for their driver's license numbers. Let's say you don't just need to have volunteers out here collecting as many signatures as they can. Let's cap a number of signatures that any one person can collect. It's just to give people as many hurdles to trip over as they possibly can. And the last is then we've just got a lot of elected officials dragging their feet to not do their jobs to certify things for the ballot. Oh, it's my job to summarize your petition and summarize it for voters. I'm just not going to write the summary. You're going to have to sue me. Oh, it's my job to count the signatures. I'm just not going to do it. You're going to have to sue me. There's a lot of just brazen interference with the process that we're seeing as the last stage of how folks who want to dismantle direct democracy are trying to undermine it.
I want to ask a few questions about those because the
Please.
owner signature regulations, right? That sounds very similar to, you can tell me what language they're using, but that sounds very similar to their tactics to make people question the security of voting, for example.
Absolutely.
Who are these people that are collecting signatures? What are they really doing? There's something nefarious about it without actually outlining what the nefarious thing is. Is that what they're using here?
Absolutely. They're requiring that every person collecting signatures should have to get a background check, that they should all, okay, they're standing outside grocery stores with clipboards. Like, let's get a grip on what is important and not important here. What that means is that every person who wants to volunteer to help raise the minimum wage by collecting signatures has to subject themselves to this long, onerous background check process. There are criminal penalties if there are mistakes made. Like, there's a lot here that, taken individually, no one is like, God, that's an assault on democracy. But taken together, really has a chilling effect. And it's the exact same thing as the assault on voting rights. If you make it harder for people to register, if you change when and where they can register, if you change when and where they can vote, if you make fewer places where they can vote on fewer days with more forms of ID, with sure, no one of those changes prohibits people from being able to vote. But the more hurdles and burdens you create, the fewer and fewer people who will participate. And that the fact that is what they want is not only a problem for direct democracy, it's also a damning indictment of our representative democracy. You should want to be representing the views of as many people as possible. That is the antithesis of their orientation at this point.
They're very good at crafting these narratives that there's this vague thing that you should fear, right? They need background checks for holding a clipboard. What are they going to do? It's like it's giving, they're going to eat the dogs and the cats.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And the one of the common attacks that we hear is that there are these big out of state interests that are coming in and passing ballot measures, and we need to protect our state from these big out of state interests. And what is so laughable about that argument is that there is no more localized form of lawmaking, no more grounded in the people form of lawmaking than direct democracy. It requires hundreds of thousands of local residents to sign their name saying, I want this policy to be voted on, and then hundreds, thousands of people to vote on it. We don't see a similar cry from these state houses to say, we should ban out of state corporations from being able to lobby in our state houses, or ban nonprofits who are not based in our state from being able to contribute to our campaigns as lawmakers. We have this total comfort with lobbying and money and all of this being concentrated in the state houses. And we've known about the risks of that for a very long time. And now, in this environment where truly it is a broad based, democratized system, not backroom deals, not highly paid lobbyists, this is the place that we're choosing for scrutiny on which nonprofits are engaging and whether they happen to be based in your state. Oh, ACLU doesn't have their headquarters in your state, so somehow it's nefarious that they're involved. There's really something upside down about the logic that is behind supposedly these attacks. And it's how you know that really what they're trying to do is just consolidate power in their own hands and take it away from voters.
Right, that's the perfect way to put it. There really is something upside down. I mean, these outside interests, they're just trying to give you healthcare, man. It's just
Yeah. I mean,
right.
yeah, big, bad, scary things like higher wages and healthcare.
Exactly, exactly. And so you mentioned that there were several states and several legislatures, and I want to talk about some of the hotbeds, right? Like
Sure.
Missouri. Tell me what's going on in Missouri.
Sure. So Missouri is like one of my favorite states to talk about because they have such a rich history of using ballot measures to pass progressive policies, despite it being a red state. They've used the ballot process to raise wages, to expand Medicaid, to decriminalize marijuana, to overturn their total abortion ban. It's not a surprise that it would also be on the front lines for attacks on direct democracy. And we're seeing that come in a couple of forms. One is the legislature has decided we're pretty pissed that our voters passed a constitutional amendment to protect abortion rights. We're going to refer our own abortion rights ballot measure and see if we can get them to change their minds, get voters to change their minds. And we're going to load that up with a bunch of confusing language and tie the issue of abortion together with a ban on gender affirming care for transgender youth, and try to make this as sort of a hate filled conversation as it can be. So that will go to the ballot. It is definitely an example of lawmakers, rather than listening to their voters, working every angle they have to work their own will rather than represent the will of their constituents. But very recently, just last week, we saw the legislature refer a new ballot measure that would go directly at the heart of direct democracy and change the rules for how they pass ballot measures in Missouri. And they've come up with something really new and complex. They're calling it concurrent majority, which means any future ballot measure would not only need to win a majority of votes statewide, it would also need to win a majority of votes in a majority of congressional districts. So this means that even if a vast majority of voters in Missouri want to pass a higher minimum wage, if just a couple of congressional districts say, no, we don't want to, then the whole thing fails. It will mean that roughly 5% of Missouri voters will have a veto over the entire state. And it's meant to take power away from urban centers like St. Louis and Kansas City. Let's not lose sight of the fact that's also an attempt to disenfranchise voters of color and voters in urban areas. So that is also a big part of this, but it is a new version of a supermajority requirement. And that is a thing that is hard to understand. It's hard to put into a soundbite, and it is a direct assault on democracy, and it's something we've really got to help Missouri voters understand the consequences of.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about the first piece of that, where they are tying access to abortion to gender affirming care? How is that being worded?
You know, it is how it will end up being worded in front of voters is the subject of litigation right now,
I
because
see.
it is so misleading how they originally drafted it that advocates on the ground have taken the state to court and said this is so misleading to voters, it can't possibly proceed. So, what I'm going to describe, I hope won't actually be the thing that ends up in front of Missouri voters. But they are essentially saying, do you want to make sure that all of these healthcare standards for abortions are upheld? And including, do you want to make sure that people who are the victims of rape and incest have access to abortion? And do you want to ban gender affirming care for minors? As just a bullet point in a list. That's how it's summarized. It's just right there. It is not at all clear to voters that what they are saying is that abortions would only be available to the people who are listed in this bullet pointed list. But it is very clear that they are calling out a ban on healthcare for transgender youth in black and white. And that care is already banned in Missouri. This would add it to the Constitution, but it is actually already banned in Missouri. So it is being used as a tactic to inflame certain elements of a base and distract them from a conversation about abortion and reproductive health care. And I don't think that this is the last time we will see this tactic. I think this is really important for us to notice
Mhm.
as we look at the cross sectional, intersectional work that our movement has to do, is that this is being tried out in Missouri. If they can use the issue of transgender healthcare to assault reproductive freedom in Missouri, this will become their playbook. They will use hatred and vilification of transgender people in this country, not just to go after the rights of transgender people, but also to go after broader bodily autonomy and reproductive freedoms issues. And so we really need to make sure that those of us who think of ourselves as reproductive rights advocates or freedom advocates of any kind are
Mhm.
not thinking of these issues totally separately and saying, okay, let the transgender advocates fend for themselves, because it is not just in sort of woke ideology that these issues are tied intricately together. They are being tied intricately together by the opponents who want to take all of these freedoms away. And we need to see these battles as intertwined.
That's so interesting on so many layers. That's just another whole other conversation. But I think it's interesting that you have to constantly use confusion and trickery to get people to support your agenda, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we learned in the wake of the Dobbs decision, where a lot of so much public conversation has been happening around the issue of abortion, is that we can change people's attitudes even about a strongly held issue like reproductive rights if we can help them relate the issue to values they already hold and help them see themselves in the shoes of people who need to seek abortion care. So many of the ballot measures around abortion rights that have succeeded over the past several years have been because of people who have been willing to tell their stories, to really help people find relatability in why someone may choose this for a lot of different reasons or need an abortion even if they don't want an abortion for healthcare reasons, for fatal fetal abnormalities, all sorts of things. And I have hope for the evolution of public sentiment around transgender healthcare issues, learning the same learning from the same trajectory we've seen even over a short period of time, relatively short period of time since Dobbs, that we have been able to win on abortion in states like Montana and Ohio and Missouri. So it is important for us not just to tie this work together because these issues are getting attacked together,
Right.
but also because there's similar themes of hope and progress for both of those issues, even though one right now is being weaponized in a really violent and vile way. That used to be the cudgel that abortion was in many partisan political fights. It used to be a third rail to not talk about. And that certainly was not the experience we had at the ballot box a couple of years ago.
Right. I have the same hope that you do, that we have that a similar evolution with trans rights. I don't know who I was talking to a few months ago about this, but 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, not that long ago, 15 years ago, maybe, we weren't here with trans rights and LGBTQ rights. We weren't here. This is something that has kind of snowballed again very recently. This kind of vitriol that's directed at this community. I'm also hoping that we'll see a similar evolution with gun violence,
Mm,
right? Um,
mhm,
Especially since it's the number one cause of deaths for children right now. A
mhm.
different conversation again.
Yes.
But I want you to talk about Arkansas if you can, because there's litigation there, and I'm just curious as to what's happening there.
Sure. And I want to talk about Arkansas. I also want to touch on Florida.
Hmm.
The very interesting and great thing that is happening in Arkansas. And again, these are not states that people typically think of as being the tip of the spear for democracy rights, but they often are. The people whose democracy rights are most under attack have to figure out ways to fight back and respond. And so advocates in Arkansas have actually drafted ballot measure language that they are trying to advance that would improve and protect the ballot measure process itself. And that is a really exciting tactic to not just always be taking these attacks on the process on the chin and hoping to survive them. This is really an attempt to say, the way the process is happening in Arkansas is unfair. We want to advance improvements in the process. And oh, by the way, we are going to use our advancement of these ballot measures as our standing and our leverage to sue over parts of the process that we believe are unconstitutional and unfair. And so that litigation is ongoing in Arkansas. Arkansas has had years of both marquee types assaults. They've attempted 60% supermajority changes in Arkansas and failed to succeed with that with the voters. And they've been trying these dribs and drabs, death by a thousand cuts to the process assaults, background checks, complicated paperwork processes, nearly impossible approval processes from the attorneys general to get onto the ballot. These are the things that those advocates in Arkansas are suing over. We're really paying a lot of attention to that litigation. And we also think that it's a really innovative and exciting approach to be using the ballot measure process to improve it.
I see. In Florida. So what's happening with Florida, which I think is
Well,
really
Florida,
interesting.
I mean, it's sort of the butt of every joke, but in this case, for good reason. It is the hardest place in the country to qualify and win a ballot measure. I touched on one of the reasons
Mhm.
why earlier. They already have a 60%
Right.
supermajority to pass ballot measures in Florida. The sheer scale and size of Florida means you need to collect over 1 million signatures to get on the ballot. It is hugely difficult. But this year, Florida lawmakers decided that it was not hard enough and passed legislation to make it even harder to qualify questions for the ballot. And that legislation had a lot of different elements, almost all of which are now the subject of litigation. There are several ballot measure campaigns that have brought collectively suits against the state. But some of the examples are getting so egregious in Florida, it's almost like they're running out of ways to make it hard. So one of them is we've already talked about needing background checks for everybody. They're now not only making campaigns pay to have their signatures counted by the state, but giving every county and district in the state the ability to set whatever price for that they want. Meaning they can change the prices, they can make them exorbitantly expensive. If you have to collect over 1 million signatures and every single county can decide on a different rate that they're going to charge you to count all those signatures, needless to say, that has a chilling effect on who can participate in the process. The list goes on and on of ways that they are saying volunteers can't collect as many signatures. There's potential fees and fines for anyone who makes a mistake, criminal liabilities, even if they correct those mistakes. So it is one of the most important places for us to actually pursue and win litigation against these assaults on free speech and on civic participation, because they are some of the most egregious attacks. And if we don't stop them in Florida, we know that these same tactics get picked up and transplanted to other states.
That's very tricky. I'm really actually surprised and somewhat slightly impressed by the charging per signature or charging the amount per
Oh,
signature. I mean, it's very tricky. I mean, they do come up with some clever ones, don't they?
they do. And, there are times when you think, it feels like they are almost putting us through this game of whack-a-mole of
Mhm.
different assaults on the process just to keep us distracted from trying to advance the proactive policies that actually benefit people. And so while I am focused in this conversation on raising the alarm on the assault on direct democracy, and I think we need to be pursuing litigation. We need to be voting no on these questions when they come in front of voters. We need to be really shining the bright light of accountability on lawmakers to stop this assault. We also have to remember in a highly celebratory and motivating way that they are doing this because we are winning.
Right.
They are doing this because we are winning. And if we weren't winning, if the voters were not with us, if they could just beat us at the ballot box, if the policies we were passing were toothless or meaningless or not going into effect, they would not need to do all of this. And so there is something that animates me, inspires me, keeps me in this fight by saying, we are doing something very right when they are having to put this amount of energy into trying to interrupt us. And that I really want people to hear as the like clarion call, like the motivating call to keep at it, to not give up on direct democracy, to not think of this as too weedsy or esoteric, because we have this power, we have been wielding it, and they know they can't beat us on the issues. They know that the electorate actually is more with us than with them. And that's why they're trying to change the rules of the game.
Right, right. I feel like that's a perfect place to end. However, I have to throw in one more question, right? I
Please.
mean, this is how I feel overall. I feel like we are just at a stage where a lot of people still don't know about ballot measures and the good that
Mhm.
they can do. And I feel like this is what our conversations have been about, to kind of spread the word that this is a place where we can exercise direct democracy. We want to get it in more states. And now we're fighting these attacks on the ballot measure process. What can we do aside from just knowing that this is happening? What can the listeners do? What can I do to help protect this?
So we have a consolidated effort here at the Fairness Project. It's called the Ballot Measure Rescue Campaign. It's where we are both raising money to help support these vote no campaigns, to fund litigation, to fund the work of advocates on the ground. If you want to get involved, if you have any loose change dollars to spare and you want to contribute them towards these fights, this is the place to do it. You can go to thefairnessproject.org and join with us. We would love to have you. And this is a getting to know thefairnessproject.org as a website and following us on social media is a great place to stay up to date with where these questions will be appearing on your ballot, where we are having days of action in state houses, where we are asking people to show up to hold their lawmakers accountable. We are really trying to be both a hub of information and also spotlight the local organizations and the local campaigns, local groups that are doing this work on the ground, because this is always, for us, a partnership between us shining a bright spotlight on the broad national trends and really making sure that we're highlighting the people on the ground in Missouri, in Arkansas, in Florida, in states all around the country who are doing this hard work day in and day out.
What is it called again?
The Ballot Measure Rescue Campaign is
Yes.
our work here at the Fairness Project, and you can find all of that information at thefairnessproject.org.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. And Kelly, thank you so much for the report and going into detail with me. Thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.